Medieval torture devices. The very phrase awakens images of spiked chairs, iron maidens, and racks stretching bodies to the breaking point. But were they truly the tools of cruelty used in castles and dungeons, or are they myths exaggerated by later storytellers? Some claim these inventions were instruments of pure terror, crafted to extract confessions or punish the condemned. Others suggest they may never have been used at all, instead serving as propaganda or theater. Did the Middle Ages truly hold a dark carnival of pain, or have history books misled us? To understand the truth about medieval torture devices, it helps to place them in the broader context of their time. The Middle Ages, stretching roughly from the 5th century AD to the 15th, was a period of enormous political, social, and religious change in Europe. Justice systems were fragmented, often relying on local lords, religious courts, or royal institutions. Trials could be conducted by ordeal, where divine judgment was believed to decide guilt, or through legal proceedings where confessions carried enormous weight. In a society where authority was asserted through both spectacle and fear, the possibility of gruesome torture devices fit seamlessly into the cultural imagination. One of the most infamous torture devices supposedly used in the Middle Ages is the Iron Maiden. This standing coffin lined with spikes is said to have trapped victims inside, while metal points pierced their flesh. For centuries, it has stood as the ultimate symbol of medieval brutality. But historians now believe the Iron Maiden may never have existed during the Middle Ages at all. Evidence suggests the earliest Iron Maidens were assembled in the 18th and 19th centuries, designed for museum exhibitions rather than actual punishment. These displays capitalized on morbid curiosity, presenting a vision of the Middle Ages as a nightmare of cruelty. Today, many scholars see the Iron Maiden not as fact, but as invention. Another notorious device is the rack, a wooden frame designed to stretch the human body by pulling the arms and legs apart. Unlike the Iron Maiden, the rack does appear in medieval records, though it may not have been as widespread as legend suggests. Evidence connects its use to England in the late Middle Ages and early modern period. Testimonies and accounts describe victims dislocated and broken under its pressure, used by authorities to extract confessions of treason or heresy. While dramatic illustrations often exaggerate its appearance, historians agree that the rack was one of the more plausible instruments of medieval torture. The so-called torture chair, a seat lined with iron spikes, features prominently in the popular imagination. According to later descriptions, victims were strapped down while sharp points pressed into their skin, sometimes beneath heated metal plates. But here again, historians caution against taking such claims at face value. Many of the chairs displayed in 19th century museums appear to have been constructed centuries after the Middle Ages. Although the idea of immobilizing and terrifying prisoners was certainly practical for interrogators, the evidence for the spiked chair's use in medieval Europe remains uncertain. While many elaborate devices may be more myth than reality, historical sources confirm that physical torture in medieval Europe did occur. The methods were often simple, relying more on the human body than on complex machinery. Techniques included thumbscrews, which crushed fingers, strappado, where victims were suspended by their arms until they dislocated, and the use of fire or heated irons. Punishments might involve whipping, branding, or confinement in painful positions. These approaches required little more than rope, heat, or wood, tools that were readily available. What mattered was their ability to create fear and force compliance, rather than precision engineering. Torture in the medieval period was closely tied to legal and religious systems. Inquisitorial courts, especially during the later Middle Ages, sometimes authorized its use in order to obtain confessions of heresy. The underlying idea was that truth resided in the words of the accused, and pain could compel honesty. However, records suggest that formal guidelines limited its application, requiring authorization from authorities and restricting it to particular cases. Historians point out that torture was not used casually or constantly, but rather as a controlled legal instrument, however brutal it may seem through modern eyes. The perception of medieval torture devices often overshadowed their actual use. Public fear of brutal punishment served a purpose on its own, reinforcing the power of rulers and institutions. Even if a gruesome tool was rarely or never employed, its presence in a dungeon could intimidate prisoners into compliance. Centuries later, when Enlightenment thinkers denounced the Dark Middle Ages, they often embellished these instruments to highlight their contrast with modern justice. By displaying horrific devices in museums or publications, they constructed an image of a barbaric past that justified their own progress. It may surprise many to learn that some of the most iconic torture devices belong not to the medieval centuries, but to the imagination of later writers, collectors, and showmen. The 18th and 19th centuries, gripped by romantic fascination with Gothic horror, invented or reconstructed many of these contraptions. Devices such as the Pair of Anguish, an expanding metal object supposedly forced into mouths or other orifices, have little evidence of practical use. Instead, they function as stories, tools of moral caution, or shocking curiosities in collections meant to thrill the public. This blend of fact and fiction complicates the line between medieval reality and modern myth. When the evidence is compared side by side, historians distinguish between devices that verifiably existed, such as the rack and thumbscrews, and those that appear more mythical, such as the Iron Maiden and spiked chair. What emerges is a picture that is both less theatrical, yet no less disturbing. Torture in the Middle Ages was not dominated by elaborate steel machines, but by basic, effective forms of pain and humiliation. The enduring images of monstrous devices may tell us more about the fears and fascinations of later centuries than about medieval practices themselves. The myths of medieval torture devices continue to captivate modern audiences because they condense the complexity of history into powerful symbols. They embody the notion of a dark age, a time supposedly governed by cruelty and superstition. For tourists visiting castles or museums, the idea of dungeons filled with Iron Maidens and spiked chairs fits neatly into expectation. For writers and filmmakers, these devices offer chilling props that perfectly conjure a world of fear. The truth might be more restrained, but myths survive because they satisfy the human appetite for stories of horror and extremes. The question of whether medieval torture devices were real reveals a fascinating blend of history and imagination. Some instruments, such as the rack, can be traced with credible evidence. Others, like the Iron Maiden, appear to be later inventions shaped by curiosity and propaganda. What historians know today is that torture did exist in the Middle Ages, but it was often simpler in practice than legend suggests. The enduring power of these devices lies not only in how they may have been used, but in how they shaped our understanding of the past. In separating myth from reality, we gain not only a deeper view of medieval justice, but also insight into how every age tells stories about those that came before.